She wasn't in the photos when they were taken. That's what makes this story impossible to explain. Every picture came from a different crime scene, different years, different cities, different victims. But somewhere in the background, always half blurred, stood the same woman, a long red coat, a vacant stare, and the same faint smile that looked almost rehearsed. At first, detectives thought it was coincidence, a look-alike, maybe an investigator, maybe a journalist. But when the timeline was built, something didn't add up. One picture was from 1983, another from 1999, then 2017. She never aged, her face identical down to every shadow and wrinkle. The strangest part, none of the photos were ever made public before being compared. She was there before anyone could have known the others existed. When one detective tried to trace her, the database returned nothing. No ID, no birth record, no passport. Just a single CCTV clip, 3 seconds long, where she looks directly into the camera, tilts her head slightly, and disappears behind a passing bus. That was the last time anyone saw her. But weeks later, another picture surfaced, this time from a crime that hadn't happened yet. Who is the woman in the red coat? A witness? A hunter? Or something that walks through tragedy itself, drawn to it like a shadow to fire? Whatever she is, the pattern is clear. Every time she appears, someone dies. And she's already been spotted again. But this time, the image didn't come from a police file. It came from someone's phone, posted online. Yesterday, they called her the Red Woman long before anyone realized she might be real. At first, it was just an urban legend whispered in online forums. A ghostly figure said to appear in the background of old crime scene photographs. Most dismissed it as coincidence or digital hoaxes meant to scare the curious. But then the police archives began to show something undeniable. The same woman, the same red coat, decade after decade. The first known photograph came from a 1983 homicide in Chicago. A grainy Polaroid captured her standing behind a line of officers, her face half hidden by a passing car. Investigators assumed she was a bystander. Then another picture surfaced, this one from a robbery in Detroit, 1999. Same coat, same face. The original detective on the case, now retired, swore he remembered every witness that night. There was no woman in red, he told the press. But she's there in the photo. I'd bet my life she wasn't. From that point on, the legend grew teeth. Online detectives compared thousands of crime scene images across databases, and the same silhouette kept appearing, always distant, always watching. And then came the CCTV clip. 3 seconds, enough to make the legend impossible to ignore. She turns, looks straight at the camera, and smiles. Not a human smile. Too slow, too knowing. What started as myth became an active investigation that no one wanted to lead. Files vanished, hard drives failed, and 2 officers reportedly quit after claiming they saw her in person. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from, your country, your city, even the time right now, because this isn't just another story online. The last confirmed sighting of the woman in the red coat wasn't from decades ago. It was filmed in someone's neighborhood. Rain fell like dust over the city of Marrowbridge. Not heavy, not gentle, just endless, gray and tired. The kind of rain that made the world look like it was fading. Detective Samuel Reed watched it smear the window of the evidence room as if trying to wash away everything that had happened in the last 48 hours. The photograph lay in front of him, sealed in a transparent folder. It had been taken by a forensic photographer at a domestic crime scene, a small apartment on the east side, a place with cracked walls and the smell of rust. The victim, a man in his late 30s, had been found sitting upright in a chair, eyes wide open as though frozen mid-sentence. Cause of death, unknown. No wounds, no struggle, no signs of poison, just fear carved into his expression like marble. Reed wasn't supposed to notice the background, but he did. Everyone who looked at the picture did, though no one wanted to talk about it. Behind the man's body, half hidden by the frame of the window, stood a woman in a red coat, out of focus, almost blending with the color of the curtains, but undeniably there, watching. He leaned closer. The rain outside hissed against the glass like static. Her face was pale, ageless, the eyes calm, detached. There was no blur of motion, no sign that she had moved. It was as if she had been standing still for years. He exhaled, trying to shake the unease creeping up his spine. Who was at the scene? He asked. A young officer, Harris, flipped through the report. Just the victim. Door locked from the inside. Neighbor heard the radio playing, then nothing. No witnesses? None. Reed pointed at the photograph. Then who the hell is this? Harris frowned. Sir, there was no woman when we arrived. I checked the footage from the body cams. She isn't there. That image, it only appeared on the printed photo. Reed looked at him, then back at the picture. You're telling me she doesn't exist on the digital file? Harris nodded. Only on paper. The detective stared at the woman's faint outline, her coat almost glowing against the dull tones of the photo. Something about her posture felt deliberate, as if she knew she was being captured. He'd seen strange things in 2 decades of homicide work, but this was different. This wasn't chaos. It was precision. He didn't sleep that night. The rain followed him home, tapping on his apartment windows like a polite intruder. He poured a glass of whiskey and sat in the dark, the photocopy spread across his table. His lamp flickered once, twice. He kept staring at her face, tracing the features with his eyes. There was familiarity there, the kind that sits at the edge of memory, waiting to be recognized. Where had he seen her before? He reached for his laptop. The department database was slow, built on ancient servers. He ran a facial recognition match. The software processed for a few minutes, then returned. No match found. Frustrated, he opened the file manually. A set of old photos appeared. Unsolved cases. One, dated April 12, 1989. A double homicide. Different victims, different location. But his chest tightened when he zoomed in on the corner of the image. There she was. The same red coat, the same stillness, the same faint smile that didn't belong in any picture of death. Reed's breath caught in his throat. He rubbed his eyes, thinking exhaustion was playing tricks. But when he looked again, she was still there, standing just outside the police tape, her head slightly tilted as if listening. He printed the 2 images and placed them side by side. 1989, 2025, 36 years apart. The same woman. He whispered to himself, "That's not possible." Morning came grey and heavy. He drove to the records division, a basement filled with the ghosts of the city's crimes, boxes stacked like tombstones. The air smelled of dust and cold ink. "Reed, you're up early," said Carla, the archivist, sipping her coffee. "I need files from 83 to 99. Anything involving this?" He slid the first photograph toward her. She squinted. "Huh. Red coat. Classic. Just get me everything you can." An hour later, he was surrounded by paper. Crime scene photos, reports, and negatives. At first, they were just ordinary tragedies. Robberies, homicides, disappearances. But then, patterns emerged. Background figures. Red fabric blurred at the edges. He counted 8 appearances between 1983 and 2004. Every time the woman was present. Sometimes reflected in a mirror. Sometimes standing across the street. Always detached. Always watching. "What's the connection?" Carla asked quietly. Reed didn't answer. His pulse was hammering. The victims were all unrelated. Different ages, genders, backgrounds. No shared locations. The only constant was her. He picked up one of the older reports. The lead detective's name caught his eye. Detective Henry Lowell, retired 15 years ago. Reed knew him, an old legend in the department. He'd worked some of the city's darkest cases before burning out. Reed found his address in the system and drove out before anyone could stop him. Lowell lived in a small house on the outskirts of Marrowbridge. Overgrown yard, curtains drawn. The air smelled of rain and cigarettes. The old man answered the door slowly, his eyes sharp despite the years. "Sam Reed," he said, recognizing him. "Didn't expect you. What brings a homicide detective to my grave?" Reed handed him the photo. "Do you remember this?" Lowell's hand trembled as he adjusted his glasses. His pupils shrank. "Jesus Christ. So you've seen her," Reed said. Lowell sank into his chair, staring at the image. "I hoped they'd burned these. Who is she?" The old man shook his head. "We called her the Marker. Back then it was just whispers. We thought she was some tabloid hoax, until we started noticing her in our own cases. Always standing there, always before something terrible happened." "Before?" Reed repeated. Lowell looked up. "Not after. Before. Days. Sometimes hours. We thought she was a witness, but when we checked, she wasn't in the footage, only in the developed prints. Always the same look, like she was waiting." Reed felt his throat tighten. "And what did you do about it?" Lowell laughed, a bitter, broken laugh. "What do you think? We stopped looking. You can't chase something that isn't human, son." Reed left the house with the wind screaming through the trees. He didn't want to believe it, but every instinct told him Lowell was right. That night, he returned to the station and printed out every known photo of her. 12 in total. He pinned them on the board, a mosaic of red bleeding through decades of death. He stared at them for hours, connecting string, drawing lines, searching for logic in madness. That's when he noticed something no one else had. In every photo, every single one, her body was facing north. No matter where the photo was taken, she was always turned the same way. He pulled out a map, marking each crime scene. When he connected the points, a rough line appeared, leading out of the city, past the river, into the industrial ruins beyond. At the very end of that line, one name stood out: St. Helena Textile Factory, abandoned since 1982. He whispered under his breath, "That's where you're going, isn't it?" The drive took an hour. The factory sat like a corpse at the edge of the world, half eaten by vines and fog. The sign out front was rusted beyond recognition, windows shattered, roof collapsing inward like a wound. Reed parked the car and stepped out. The air was thick, metallic. A faint hum of wind moved through the broken pipes, sounding almost like a breath. He moved slowly, flashlight cutting through the dust. Each step echoed like it was being recorded by someone unseen. In the main hall, an old wall of photographs was still standing, employee portraits from decades ago, faces faded and yellowed. He scanned them absently, then froze. Third row, far right, the woman in the red coat. Only, she wasn't wearing red. She was in uniform, smiling like everyone else. A nameplate under the photo read, Helen Graves, Quality Control Supervisor. His pulse spiked. He took a photo with his phone, zooming in on the eyes. They were unmistakable. Same shape, same stillness. He turned as a metallic clatter echoed from somewhere deeper in the factory. "Hello?" he called out. No answer. He followed the noise through a narrow hallway, the light trembling on the damp concrete. A gust of cold air brushed past him, carrying something faint, like the scent of perfume, and then he saw it, a fresh footprint in the dust. Small, pointed, recent. He raised his flashlight slowly. In the darkness ahead, a figure stood at the end of the corridor, still, watching. The beam hit her coat first, deep crimson against the grey. Reed froze. The air around him felt thick, like time had stopped. She didn't move, didn't speak, just turned her head slightly, the same motion seen in the CCTV clip. "Miss Graves," he said, his voice cracking. She tilted her head the other way, and for a second he swore her lips moved, though no sound came. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, and she was gone. Only her footprints remained, leading deeper into the dark. Reed stood alone in the silence, every nerve screaming to run. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pressed record on his phone. His voice was low, shaking. "Detective Samuel Reed, 11:47 p.m. I've found her. St. Helena Factory. Subject appears identical to all known images. She's real. She's—" A sharp noise cut through his words, a static crackle, followed by a faint, distorted whisper that didn't come from the phone. He turned toward it slowly. The whisper grew louder, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. One phrase repeated again and again. "You shouldn't have come." The light died, and the recording ended. Night had swallowed Marrowbridge whole. The rain that had haunted the city for days had stopped, but the air was still thick, heavy with the kind of silence that made you hear your own pulse. The old textile factory stood on the horizon, its broken windows glinting faintly in the moonlight like tired eyes refusing to close. Inside, Detective Reed's voice recorder lay on the floor, the red light blinking weakly, surrounded by dust. It captured nothing more that night but the echo of a whisper that wasn't supposed to exist. By morning, the building was sealed off. 2 patrol cars, yellow tape, and a forensics van parked crookedly in the mud. The officers moved carefully, their boots leaving wet prints that looked like they were sinking into the ground itself. Detective Carla Moreno stood near the entrance, holding Reed's badge in her hand. He hadn't come home. His car was outside, engine cold, no footprints leading out, none leading in except his own. She'd seen many strange disappearances in her career, but this one felt different. It felt orchestrated. Inside the factory, the air reeked of rust and old oil. The walls hummed faintly, though there was no wind. On the table near the main hall, lay a spread of photographs Reed had brought with him. The same woman in the same red coat, her eyes fixed on whoever dared to look back. Moreno bent closer, the faces around her blurred in her peripheral vision, but the woman's stare didn't. It felt focused, intentional, alive. She called to the tech team, "Check every camera, every floor. I want the moment Reed went missing." They combed through footage for hours. Nothing. He entered the main corridor at 11:41 p.m. The next frame was static. When the feed returned at 11:47, the hallway was empty. Reed gone, his flashlight lying on the ground, still on. Moreno clenched her jaw. No glitch lasts 6 minutes. The tech shrugged. Unless something caused interference. Electromagnetic, maybe. Whatever it was, it spiked the signal right before the blackout. She didn't respond. Her eyes fell to the footprints leading into the dark. Reed's tracks, and another set. Smaller, lighter, stopping abruptly halfway down the corridor. Later that evening, Moreno sat alone in her car outside the precinct. The city lights blurred in the rain again, glowing like ghosts through the windshield. She'd been listening to Reed's final recording on repeat. His voice was calm, steady, until the last few seconds. Then the static hit, and behind it, something faint. "You shouldn't have come." She rewound it for the 10th time. Same words, same tone. But there was something else beneath the distortion, almost like a second voice speaking in unison. Lower, older. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Detective Moreno. A pause, then a woman's voice, soft, measured. He saw her. Moreno's heart skipped. "Who is this?" "She's been seen before. You won't find him if you keep looking where he disappeared." "Then where?" The line went dead. By midnight, Moreno was back in the records division. She dragged Reed's files from the archives, his printed photos scattered under the flickering fluorescent light. Her partner, Officer Harris, leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're doing what he did," he said. He got obsessed. Moreno didn't look up. Obsession solves cases, or buries detectives. She ignored him, pinning a new set of images to the board. She'd found something Reed hadn't. One of the older photos, the one from 1989, had a partial reflection in a store window. The woman's coat wasn't red there. It was gray. The red only appeared in later photos. She zoomed in on the scan. The coat shimmered oddly under the light, as though absorbing color instead of reflecting it. Her gut twisted. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was changing, adapting. She flipped through more archives, tracing a pattern that began decades earlier. Fires, disappearances, and unexplained deaths surrounding the same areas where the red-coated woman had been seen. Each event left no trace, except a faint electromagnetic pulse recorded by nearby devices, as if the air itself had been torn open and resealed. At 3 a.m., her office phone rang. No caller ID. She answered without thinking. A man's voice, whispering, "You're not supposed to look at her this long." The line cut before she could respond. She checked the call log. Nothing. Not even a missed call notification. The fluorescent light above her buzzed once, then went dark. In the reflection of the dark computer screen, she thought she saw movement, a silhouette behind her, faint and still. When she turned, the room was empty. She exhaled shakily and gathered the files, shoving them into her bag. She needed fresh air. As she stepped outside, the early dawn fog rolled low across the street, muffling every sound. The city felt deserted, like it was holding its breath. Her eyes caught something glinting near the precinct gate, a piece of paper pinned to the fence by a safety pin. It was a photograph, freshly printed. Reed, standing in the corridor of the factory. Behind him, half hidden in shadow, the woman in the red coat. Moreno's breath caught. The timestamp at the corner read 11:48 p.m., 1 minute after the last frame of the security footage. Her hands trembled as she turned the photo over. On the back, written in perfect cursive, were the words, "You shouldn't have come either." She drove home with her heart hammering, every red light feeling like an omen. By the time she reached her apartment, the sky was bleeding orange over the rooftops. She locked every door, checked every window twice, and laid the photo face down on her desk. Sleep didn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the woman's face, not blurred now, but clear, alive, and far too close. When morning arrived, the photo was gone. In its place was a smear of dust shaped like a footprint. The city moved like it had forgotten something. Days passed since Reed's disappearance, yet Marrowbridge felt unchanged on the surface. Traffic lights blinking in rhythm, trains screeching through rusted rails, people rushing to nowhere. But Detective Carla Moreno felt the difference. It was in the air, in the shadows that lasted a bit longer than they should. Every time she looked out her window, she half expected to see a flash of red across the street. Her apartment had become a labyrinth of papers and photos, a living map of obsession. Reed's files were spread across the table, his last case pinned to the wall with red strings connecting events, places, faces. She had stopped eating properly, stopped answering calls from her sister, stopped sleeping without the light on. The photo that vanished kept replaying in her mind, not the image itself, but the way it disappeared, as though it had never existed at all. Objects don't vanish like that. People do, ideas do, but paper doesn't just erase itself. It was near midnight when she heard the knock. 3 slow taps, then silence. She froze. No one came to her apartment this late. She approached the door quietly, her gun already drawn. When she peered through the peephole, no one was there, only the hallway light flickering weakly as if breathing. She waited, heartbeat thudding in her throat. Another sound, this time from the floor behind her. Something had slid under the door while she was looking through it, a manila envelope, unmarked. She picked it up carefully and carried it to the table. Inside, there was a single black and white photograph and a note. The photo showed a young woman smiling beside a factory machine, the same factory where Reed disappeared. Her name tag was clear, Helen Graves. The note beneath it said only, "She was found once before." Carla stared at the message, her hands trembling. Found before meant someone had tried. She typed the name into the database, expecting the usual nothing, but to her surprise, the system responded. There was a file, sealed since 1985, authorized for access by someone long retired. She bypassed the encryption using Reed's credentials. The file unfolded slowly on her screen, a collection of scanned reports, witness statements, and one chilling headline from a local newspaper. Factory fire claims 27 lives. Supervisor missing. The photo in the article showed the same building reduced to ash and steel skeletons. Helen Graves was listed as among the missing, presumed dead. But there was something strange. Her employee records dated back to 1952. That couldn't be. The woman in those files looked identical for decades. No aging, no difference. Carla scrolled through the scanned pages until one document stopped her cold. A memo from an investigator dated May 2nd, 1985. It read, "Subject Graves observed near site post-fire. Witness claims she was wearing a red coat. Subject vanished upon approach. That was 40 years ago." Her blood ran cold. If this was true, the woman in the coat had walked away from a fire that consumed an entire building and never aged since. Moreno leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, mind racing. Who was Helen Graves, and why was she tied to every violent event across generations? Outside, thunder rumbled. The power flickered once. She looked toward the window and saw her reflection. Except it wasn't her reflection. The glass showed her face for a moment, then behind her for just an instant, a faint crimson shape. She turned violently, pointing her gun, but the room was empty. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The photo on her desk, the one from the envelope, was gone again. Only the envelope remained, now damp with condensation, like it had been outside in the rain. She picked it up. The back was marked with an address she hadn't noticed before, scrawled in smeared pencil, St. Helena Cemetery, Lot 12. She grabbed her coat. She didn't even think to call for backup. The night air bit her skin as she drove through empty streets. The cemetery sat behind a row of dead trees, its iron gate leaning, the sign almost unreadable. Her headlights cut through the mist, illuminating rows of crooked stones. When she stepped out of the car, her flashlight beam carved a narrow path through the fog. The silence was unnatural, too complete, like sound itself had been swallowed. She followed the path markers until she reached Lot 12. A single grave stood there, isolated from the others, its marble surface cracked with age. The inscription was faint but legible. Helen Graves, 1923, 1985. Below it, someone had scratched fresh words into the stone. She never left. The wind picked up suddenly, scattering leaves. She crouched to touch the carved letters, her fingers trembling as if expecting warmth beneath the stone. Instead, she felt a faint vibration. It wasn't imagination. The ground pulsed like a heartbeat. She stumbled back, eyes wide as the soil trembled for a moment, then stopped. She backed away slowly, flashlight shaking in her grip. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She nearly dropped it. The screen showed a message from an unknown number. "You're standing where he is." She froze. "Read," she whispered aloud, but there was no reply. The phone vibrated again, this time showing a new image file. It was dark and grainy, but she recognized it instantly. The inside of her own apartment, her desk, her lamp, her wall of photos. And standing beside the desk, clear as daylight, was the woman in the red coat. She dropped the phone. The sound echoed unnaturally, stretching out like an endless ripple. She grabbed it again and checked the timestamp. 2 minutes ago. The message had been sent while she was already here, which meant someone, or something, was inside her home right now. She ran back to her car, tires skidding on wet gravel as she sped through the fog. Her mind screamed to call for help, but her body moved on instinct. When she burst into her apartment, the door swung open too easily. The lights were on. Everything was as she'd left it, except the wall. Every photo had been removed. In their place, pinned neatly, were new ones. Herself, sleeping, herself reading files, herself walking into the cemetery minutes ago. Her breath came in short bursts. Someone had been watching. For days, maybe weeks. In the corner of the room, her laptop screen glowed faintly. A new video file was open. The title, Graves 03:17 a.m. She clicked play with shaking fingers. The footage was grainy, flickering. It showed the hallway outside her apartment. The timestamp matched the moment she received the message. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a figure entered the frame. The red coat was unmistakable. The woman walked slowly toward the door, stopped, and turned directly toward the camera. The image distorted, the sound of static growing louder, almost like whispering. Then the video froze on her face. The pixels flickered, shifting until the features changed. It wasn't Helen anymore. It was Carla, her own face staring back at her from the red coat. She stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, every reflective surface, the mirror, the window, the laptop screen, showed the same thing. Herself, wearing that same coat, standing where the woman always stood. Her phone vibrated again, one final message flashing on the screen. "You've seen her too long." Then it died. The room dimmed, as though something unseen had drawn the light away. Carla tried to run, but her limbs felt slow, heavy, like moving underwater. Her ears rang. The air around her thickened, humming faintly. She looked down. Her shadow on the floor was stretching, moving against her will. It twisted, pulled toward the window as if dragged by invisible hands. She tried to scream, but the sound barely left her throat. Then, just before everything went black, she heard it again. That same layered whisper from Reed's recording, a dozen voices speaking as one. "You shouldn't have come." When the morning sun rose over Marrowbridge, the apartment was quiet. The chair was upright again. The laptop was closed. On the desk lay a single photograph, freshly printed. It showed the interior of the apartment, perfectly composed, every detail sharp. In the background, near the window, stood Detective Carla Moreno, wearing a red coat, smiling faintly. The sun rose over Marrowbridge with a pale, washed-out light that made everything look fragile, as if the city itself was tired of existing. The street outside Carla's apartment buzzed faintly with early traffic, but inside, the air was still, too still. Officer Harris stood in the doorway holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, his eyes locked on the photo lying on her desk. The image showed Carla wearing the red coat, smiling faintly near the window, except no one had seen her since last night. The forensics team moved quietly through the room, dusting for prints that weren't there, checking cameras that recorded nothing unusual. It was as though she had evaporated between one breath and the next, leaving behind only the echo of her own obsession. Harris rubbed his temple, exhaustion crawling behind his eyes. He'd worked alongside Carla for 4 years, seen her navigate the darkest corners of this city without fear. But this case was different. It had swallowed Reed first, and now her. Every instinct in him screamed to close the file, to seal it forever, and pretend none of it had happened. Yet, something in that photo wouldn't let him. He leaned closer. There was something strange about her expression, as if the smile wasn't hers. The corners of her lips pulled upward too slightly, too slow. And her eyes weren't looking at the camera. They were looking past it, towards something behind whoever took the picture. Harris swallowed hard and stepped back. "Bag it," he muttered to the evidence tech. But as the photo was sealed, a glint of red flickered in the corner of his vision. He turned sharply toward the window. Nothing. Just the city, ordinary and indifferent. Still, his heart wouldn't slow. That night, he went back to the precinct alone. Everyone else had clocked out, the building lit only by dim corridor lights and the faint hum of vending machines. Reed's board was still up in the evidence room, red strings connecting decades of tragedy. Harris stood before it, the only sound his own breathing. The faces stared back at him, frozen moments of fear and death, and among them, always the woman in the red coat. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in patterns, and this one was too deliberate to be chance. He took out the photo of Carla and pinned it to the board. The red coat bled into the cluster like it belonged there, another piece in a puzzle that refused to end. As he stepped back, the fluorescent light above flickered once, then steadied. He almost laughed at himself. "You're seeing things," he muttered. But as he turned to leave, something stopped him. The air changed. It wasn't colder, not exactly, just heavier, like walking into a room full of static. The hum of electricity deepened, vibrating in his chest. He froze, eyes darting to the board. The photos were swaying, barely moving, though there was no draft. A whisper threaded through the silence. Not loud, not even clear, but enough to make his skin crawl. He spun around, but the room was empty. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the low crackle of the fluorescent light, as if mocking him. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. Movement. Faint and slow in the reflection of the glass door. A flash of red. His breath hitched. He turned toward it fully and the door slammed shut behind him. The lights went out. For a moment he was blind. His hand fumbled for his phone, the screen lighting up the darkness in pale blue. The glow revealed the evidence board again, but it wasn't the same. Every photo now showed the same image. Carla standing in that apartment, the red coat vivid, her smile stretched wider, her eyes darker. "No," he whispered, backing away. His phone buzzed. A notification. Unknown number. One message. "You're next." His mouth went dry. He dropped the phone and reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't move. The whisper returned, closer this time, breathing into his ear. "Don't look away." He turned, despite it, flashlight trembling, sweeping across the corners of the room. Empty, 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 until the beam landed on the far end of the hallway outside the glass. There she was, the woman in the red coat, still, perfectly still. Her head tilted just slightly, the same as in every photo. His throat closed. "What do you want?" he shouted, though his voice broke midway. She didn't move, didn't blink, but something about her presence filled the air, pressing down on him, heavy and deliberate. Then slowly, she lifted her hand and pointed at him. The light above flickered violently, bursting in a shower of sparks, and the glass door shattered inward. When he opened his eyes again, the room was bright, almost too bright. He was standing alone, the board empty, the glass unbroken. His phone was gone. His heart pounded like a drum in his skull. "You're losing it," he whispered to himself, gripping the desk for balance. But then he saw something on the floor, a single photograph. He picked it up carefully. It was a picture of him, standing exactly where he was now, head turned toward the board, fear frozen in his face. And behind him, in the reflection of the glass door, the red coat gleamed. He threw the picture down and stormed out, unable to breathe. Outside, the city felt colder than before. He drove home fast, not daring to look at the rearview mirror for too long. When he reached his apartment, he locked the door twice, turned on every light, and poured himself a drink. The liquor burned down his throat, but it did nothing to steady his hands. He sat on the couch, staring at nothing, until his eyes fell on the photo frames on the wall. Family, colleagues, memories. For a heartbeat, he swore one of them had changed. The photo of his unit, taken 3 years ago, now showed an extra figure at the edge of the group. A woman in a red coat, barely visible, but unmistakable. Harris's stomach twisted. He ripped the frame down, smashing it on the floor. The glass shattered, but the photo inside remained intact. The woman was gone again. Only a smear of red remained where she had been. He sat back, shaking, trying to remember when things had started to feel wrong. It wasn't Reed's disappearance. It wasn't Carla's. It was before that. He remembered seeing something red in the reflection of a shop window a week earlier, thinking nothing of it. Maybe that was when she noticed him. The thought crawled under his skin. He looked up and froze. The TV was on. He hadn't turned it on. Static filled the screen, white noise hissing softly. Then, slowly, An image began to form. A corridor, flickering lights, a man walking, himself. The same moment from earlier at the precinct. But this time, the video kept going. He watched himself turn, panic, reach for the door. Then she appeared behind him on the screen, closer than before. Her face clear now, her eyes empty. The TV began to pulse with light, the frame distorting, colors bleeding. The whisper filled the room again, layered and endless. He grabbed the remote, tried to turn it off, but it wouldn't respond. The whisper grew louder. Then the TV went black. His phone vibrated on the table. One new photo. It loaded slowly, pixels forming like a developing film. It was his living room, taken from outside the window. He was in it, sitting exactly where he was now, and behind him, in the reflection of the TV, stood the woman in the red coat, smiling. Harris didn't move for a long time. Then, trembling, he stood and went to the window. Outside, the street was empty, but in the glass, his reflection looked wrong. His own face stared back, but the color at the edge of the frame was bleeding into red, like paint soaking through paper. He reached out slowly, touching the cold glass. For a brief moment, his reflection smiled back, only it wasn't his smile. The glass cracked from the center outward, a thin spiderweb spreading in silence. The lights flickered once, twice, and then everything went dark. The next morning, the precinct received a call from a neighbor reporting an open door. They found Harris's apartment empty. No sign of struggle, no signs of forced entry. The only thing left was the TV, still on, showing a frozen frame of static. No sound, no movement, just a faint outline of red seeping through the screen, like a stain that wouldn't fade. The file was marked unsolved and sealed. But later that week, one of the evidence clerks sorting Reed's old case boxes noticed something strange. A new photograph had appeared among them, unlabeled, unnumbered, but printed in the same format as the rest. It showed 3 detectives, Reed, Carla, and Harris, standing together in the precinct, smiling faintly. Behind them, in the reflection of the window, a woman in a red coat watched quietly, her head tilted slightly as if approving. The storm that rolled into Marrowbridge that night felt different. The wind didn't just move, it searched, sliding through alleys and windows like something alive. The sky was the color of bruised steel, and thunder trembled far beyond the river. In the police archives, deep beneath the city courthouse, a young intern named Ryan Porter was finishing his shift. He'd been tasked with cleaning out the old evidence room, the one nobody visited anymore since the disappearances. The hum of the lights above him was uneven, their glow pale and sickly over rows of metal shelves stacked with dust-covered boxes. Each box was a fragment of something that had gone wrong. Cold cases, unsolved murders, stories that never found an ending. Ryan rubbed his eyes, yawning. He wasn't supposed to open anything, only catalog and remove. But when he reached the corner shelf, one box caught his attention. It was newer than the rest, cleaner, and sealed with red tape instead of the usual brown. The label on its side read, Case 403, Reed Moreno, Harris, Confidential. He frowned. He'd heard whispers about those names during coffee breaks, the detectives who vanished chasing some urban myth. Curiosity tugged at him. He peeled back the tape carefully, ignoring the small voice that told him not to. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, all of the same thing, a woman in a red coat. He flipped through them slowly, heart starting to pound. The images spanned decades, black and white, sepia, digital color, always her, always watching. One photo slipped from his hand and fluttered to the floor. He bent to pick it up, but froze halfway down. The picture showed him, standing exactly where he was now in the archive room, looking at the open box, and behind him, in the reflection of the metal cabinet, stood the woman. The overhead light flickered violently. Ryan's breath caught. He turned slowly, scanning the room. Empty. He looked again at the photo, but the image had changed. Now it showed only the empty room. No him, no woman, just stillness. His phone buzzed in his pocket, nearly making him jump. Unknown number. A single message. Don't touch the photographs. The light went out. Darkness swallowed everything. He fumbled for his phone, the weak glow of the screen barely pushing the shadows back. The walls felt closer now, as if the room had shrunk. He moved toward the exit, every step echoing louder than it should. Then he heard it. Faint footsteps behind him, slow, deliberate, perfectly matching his own. He stopped. The echo stopped. He took one more step. The sound returned. He turned sharply, raising the phone like a flashlight. The beam caught something red far at the end of the aisle. A coat, still, motionless. He backed away, pulse slamming in his ears. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, half hidden by the shelves. He could barely make out her face, but he saw her head tilt slightly. The same slow, impossible motion from the CCTV footage. He bolted toward the exit, but the door was jammed. His shaking hands pulled at the handle until the skin on his knuckles split. The footsteps behind him were faster now, echoing off the metal. When he dared to look back, the red had moved closer, not walking, just appearing, skipping space like a broken frame of film. She was near enough that he could see her eyes now, black, endless, reflecting the weak light of his phone. He screamed. The next morning, the janitor found the evidence room empty, no sign of Ryan. The box he'd opened was resealed, perfectly neat. Only the photo on top had changed. It showed the same woman, the same red coat, and beside her now stood Ryan Porter. Detective Henry Lowell heard about the intern's disappearance through the news that afternoon. He'd been retired for years, his body frail, his hands unsteady from the tremors that came with age. But when the anchor said the words, Marrowbridge Police Archives, his coffee mug slipped from his grasp and shattered on the floor. He knew this wasn't over. It never would be. He sat back in his chair, staring at the rain-streaked window, whispering a name he hadn't spoken in decades. Helen. He still had the old file locked away, hidden under the floorboards where no one would find it. It was his secret, the one thing he'd never turned in. Trembling, he pried the wooden plank loose and pulled out the metal case. Inside were the originals, the earliest photos of her, taken before the fire at the St. Helena factory. In those first images, she wasn't haunting crime scenes. She was one of them, an employee, smiling among workers who'd all died days later. And yet even then, her eyes looked wrong, too aware, too calm. Lowell flipped through the stack until he reached the last picture. It wasn't one he'd ever shown anyone, not even Reed, back when the younger detective came looking for answers. It was taken after the fire, during cleanup. The factory was ash, the air thick with smoke. But at the center of the frame, half covered by debris, a woman's body lay face down. The red coat was burned black, the hands clutching a melted camera. The coroner had declared it unidentifiable. Yet Lowell knew. He'd buried that image in his mind for 40 years. If she had died there, how could she still appear? He stood, heart hammering, and reached for the landline. His fingers hesitated above the dial, then finally pressed the buttons. The number rang once, twice, before a mechanical voice answered. Marrowbridge Police Department. He swallowed. This is Henry Lowell. I need to speak to whoever's in charge of the Reed and Moreno cases. The line crackled. A pause. Then another voice, deeper, colder. There is no active investigation under those names. I know what's happening, Lowell said urgently. It's the woman, the one in red. Silence. Then softly, Mr. Lowell, you shouldn't be talking about her. Click. The line went dead. He lowered the receiver slowly. The window behind him flickered with lightning. For a second, his reflection wasn't his own. A woman's face looked back. That night, thunder rolled endlessly above the city. Lightning cut through clouds like veins of fire. Lowell couldn't sleep. He sat in his living room with every light on. The photos spread before him like evidence of his own guilt. He replayed every memory, every warning sign he'd ignored. Reed had vanished trying to follow the pattern. Carla had vanished trying to prove it. And now, another name was being added to the list. He couldn't keep pretending this was random. The woman didn't just appear after tragedy. She brought it. He turned on the tape recorder, his voice trembling. My name is Henry Lowell. If someone finds this, it means she's come back. The woman in the red coat. I believe she's connected to the 1985 fire at St. Helena and every major incident that's followed. She doesn't age. She doesn't die. He stopped. The light flickered. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. He froze. Slowly, he turned his head. Who's there? No answer. Only the sound of rain tapping the glass. He stood, his joints aching, and moved toward the corridor. The light at the far end buzzed faintly, swinging as if something had brushed past it. He took another step, heart pounding. Helen, he whispered. A soft voice answered, barely audible. You remembered my name. His stomach dropped. The voice came from behind him. He turned, breath catching in his chest. She was there. The red coat gleamed under the lamp's weak light, beads of rain still clinging to its surface. Her face was calm, almost human, but her eyes were vast and empty. You died, he said, backing away. I changed, she whispered. They tried to burn me. They forgot that fire only spreads. He shook his head, tears blurring his vision. What are you? Her lips curved faintly. You already know. The lights went out. When the neighbors found the house the next morning, every bulb had exploded. The walls were covered in photographs that hadn't been there before, hundreds of them, pinned with perfect symmetry, showing Helen Graves standing beside every detective who had ever worked the case. At the center of the collage was one final photo. Henry Lowell, seated in his armchair, eyes closed peacefully, and behind him, the woman in the red coat, smiling faintly, one hand resting on his shoulder. Marrowbridge entered a silence it had never known before, the kind that sits over a city not after tragedy, but before it. The sky hung low, thick with a pale fog that swallowed buildings whole. The police precinct was nearly empty now, desks abandoned, files collecting dust. Officially, every case connected to the disappearances had been closed, reassigned, or buried. But in the back office of the 4th floor, one man remained. Captain Arthur Dwyer had been the one to train Reed years ago, the one who'd hired Carla Moreno, the one who'd signed off on every investigation that had led them into darkness. And now he was the only one left to wonder where they'd gone. He sat with a glass of whiskey sweating in his hand, staring at the wall of missing person bulletins. Reed, Moreno, Harris, Porter, Lowell, all gone. Only their names and faded photos remained, tacked to the corkboard like ghosts pretending to be paper. He hadn't told anyone, but for the last 3 nights he'd been receiving emails from an anonymous account. No text, no subject, only attachments, each one a photograph. At first they were random, street corners, alleyways, traffic lights, but tonight's was different. It showed him, sitting right where he was now, head bowed, glass in hand, and behind him, just barely visible in the reflection of the office window, the red coat. He didn't move for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked like a heartbeat, steady and patient. Finally, he reached for his gun, loaded it with a trembling hand, and stood. "You don't scare me," he muttered to no one, to everything. He opened the office door and stepped into the empty hallway. The light flickered once, twice, then steadied. The corridor stretched ahead like a tunnel. His boots echoed. He passed Reed's old desk, still cluttered with case files, still smelling faintly of coffee and nicotine. He paused, resting his fingers on the edge. A photograph lay there, face down. He turned it over. It was the original factory photo, Helen Graves, 1952, smiling among the workers. But now, faintly printed across the bottom in red ink, was a new line. "You're next to remember." Dwyer swallowed hard. He took the photo and shoved it into his jacket pocket. The elevator at the end of the corridor dinged softly. He hadn't pressed the button. The doors slid open. The car was empty, but the button for the basement was already lit. He stared at it for a long moment, his breath fogging the air, then stepped inside. The doors closed with a hiss. The descent was silent except for the faint hum of machinery. The light above flickered, bathing him in stuttering flashes, white, black, as though reality itself was blinking. When the elevator stopped, the doors opened to darkness. He stepped out. The basement was colder than it should have been. The air smelled of dust, water, and something faintly metallic. The evidence room was down here, the same one where Porter had vanished. The lock was broken, hanging uselessly from the latch. He pushed the door open. The shelves stood like skeletons in rows, shadows stretching long between them. At the far end of the room, a light was on, a single lamp above a table. He moved toward it slowly, gun raised. The table was covered in photographs, hundreds of them. He recognized every face. Reed, Carla, Harris, Porter, Lowell. Each image was the same. The person standing, alive, unaware, with the woman in the red coat behind them, watching. But there was one photo that made him stop cold. It was new, freshly printed. It showed him standing in the elevator, gun in hand, looking terrified, and behind him, reflected in the metal doors, the coat. The whisper started then, not loud but everywhere, a chorus of breaths overlapping, speaking without words. He turned in a slow circle, the light trembling in his hand. "Show yourself," he said, though his voice cracked halfway through. She stepped from between the shelves like a memory made solid. The coat glowed softly in the lamplight, wet at the edges as if she'd just walked through rain. Her hair was dark, her face pale and perfect in its stillness. Her eyes found him like gravity. "Who are you?" he demanded. She tilted her head just slightly, like a question she'd already answered 1,000 times. "I am what they made me," she said softly. Her voice didn't echo. It folded into the air like smoke. "Made you? The fire," she whispered. "Do you remember it? St. Helena, the day the factory burned. They said it was an accident. It wasn't." Dwyer's grip on the gun tightened. He remembered. He'd been a rookie then, barely out of academy, sent to the site as part of cleanup. The reports had never made sense. The flames spreading too fast, the bodies too few. He hadn't thought of it in years. "I was there," she continued. "They tried to hide it. They built their city over it. But ashes, remember. I don't know what you want." She took a slow step forward. "I want to be seen, and you've already looked too long." The lights flickered again. He fired once. The shot echoed, deafening. The recoil jarred his arm. When his vision cleared, she was gone. The bullet hole smoked in the far wall, but the photos on the table had changed. In every one he was there now, standing beside the others, his expression frozen in horror, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He staggered backward, tripping over the cables falling hard. When he looked up, the lamp above him began to swing, the light flashing like lightning. The room was full of whispering now, rising into a storm of voices. He scrambled to his feet and ran, the sound chasing him down the hall. He reached the elevator, slamming the button, pounding the door with his fists. Come on, come on." The doors opened, and he stumbled inside. The panel glowed red, every floor button lit at once. The car lurched upward violently. The whispering grew louder until it wasn't sound anymore but vibration, pulsing through the metal, through his bones. When the doors opened again, he wasn't in the precinct. The lights above him flickered in an endless hallway of concrete and fog. Rows of doors stretched to infinity on both sides, each marked with a brass plaque engraved with names. He turned, gasping for breath, and read the first few. Samuel Reed, Carla Moreno, David Harris, Ryan Porter, Henry Lowell. The next door was blank. Only as he stepped closer did letters begin to burn themselves across it. One by one, Arthur Dwyer. He stumbled back, heart pounding. "No," he whispered. Behind him, soft footsteps. He turned slowly. The red coat glowed faintly in the gray. She was closer than before, her face inches from his. He could see the flicker of firelight reflected in her pupils. "You can't outrun what you made," she said, voice almost kind. "You built this city on smoke and lies. You called it justice. You called it peace. But everything you bury finds its way to the surface." He shook his head, backing away. "We didn't know. You knew." The floor cracked beneath his feet. A faint orange glow rose from below, heat blooming in waves. The smell of smoke returned, thick and suffocating. He looked down. Beneath the concrete, flames coiled like serpents, rising. The doors around him began to open one by one, and from each stepped a shadow. Faint outlines of faces he recognized. Reed, Carla, Harris, Porter, Lowell. They stood silently, eyes dark, clothes untouched by time. "What are you?" he choked out. "We remember," they whispered together. The woman stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "The fire never stopped, Arthur. It just learned to wear faces." He raised the gun again, but his hand trembled violently. "If you're going to kill me, then do it," she smiled. "I don't kill, I witness." The world flared white. The next morning, the city woke to the sound of sirens. The Marrowbridge precinct was burning. By the time the firefighters arrived, the building was half consumed. Windows shattered, smoke pouring from every floor. They found no bodies, only the walls, blackened and covered in photographs fused into the concrete by heat. Each photo showed the same thing, a group of people standing together. Detectives, officers, civilians, all staring toward the camera with expressions caught between awe and fear. And in the center of each frame, untouched by flame, was the woman in the red coat. News of the fire spread fast. The official statement called it electrical failure. No one questioned it. People moved on as they always do. The city rebuilt. But those who worked the cleanup crew swore they sometimes heard whispers in the smoke, voices calling their names. One worker found an old film camera in the rubble, half melted, its lens cracked. Out of curiosity, he brought it home and developed the remaining roll. Every frame was empty, except the last. It showed a city street at dawn, mist curling over the river, and far in the distance, a woman in a red coat walking away, her figure slowly fading into the fog. Years later, new officers joined the rebuilt precinct. None of them knew the names Reed, Moreno, Harris, or Dwyer, but sometimes, during night shifts, they'd find odd things. A single photograph lying on a desk, a faint perfume in the corridor, a red reflection in the window where none should be. The stories returned in whispers that she was not a ghost, not a curse, but something older, the memory of everything the city tried to forget. Some swore they saw her standing at the edge of crime scenes just before something terrible happened, her face calm, her eyes ancient. They called her many names: the Marker, the Red Woman, the Watcher. But in the oldest reports, the ones buried in the archives that survived the fire, there was a single line typed in faded ink under subject identification: Helen Graves, status active. And if anyone ever asked where the photographs came from, no one could answer. They'd just appear on desks, in evidence lockers, in homes, sometimes even inside cameras that hadn't been used in years. Always the same coat, always the same smile. Tonight, somewhere in Marrowbridge, rain begins to fall again. A flash of lightning reveals a street corner, empty, but for a single woman walking slowly through the mist. Her coat glows like a wound against the dark. She stops under a flickering street lamp and turns her head toward the camera that isn't there. For a heartbeat, her eyes meet ours, and she smiles. Then the light goes out.